I'd like to talk about this film, Biutiful by González Iñárritu, who, as you know, is a Mexican director. So I'm going to try to show a scene from the film, but if I'm not able to, maybe we can show it towards the end if we have time to discuss. I have to apologize for the delay. So I think we all have in mind mental images of Barcelona, the Güell Park, the Sagrada Familia, the marvelous houses designed by Gaudí. So this is the Barcelona of postcards, crowded with tourists, always milling around iconic buildings. So that's why watching this film, Biutiful, yes, a Spanicized version of beautiful, which is actually, sounds like a macaronic version of beautiful, feels so shocking and difficult. There's really nothing beautiful or nothing nice or lovely about this film, or maybe there is. So instead of, kind of getting or kind of drawing a nice feeling from seeing the film, what we when we enter the movie, we kind of enter into kind of sick bodies that seem like a continuation of gloomy and dismal spaces and sick cities that don't really have a place in the title of this film. So let me give you some plot. So we have Uxbal. It is a really weird name. Okay, it's a name that Alejandro González Iñárritu kind of picked up, and he kind of got stuck with it, and he liked the kind of sonority of it, but it's not a Spanish name at all. It's just a very weird name. Period. Okay, so Uxbal is a kind of a hustler who is terminally ill. He has cancer. He has terminal cancer, and he's a very complex character because he's a devoted father. He takes care of his two children, but he's also a petty criminal that both protects and exploits. Oh my God, what's going on? Okay, not sharing. Okay, all right. But I can continue. So he protects and exploits immigrants. So he takes money from Chinese sweatshop owners and Senegalese street vendors to pay off corrupt city cops. So the cops turn a blind eye when African street vendors try to sell their wares, which are usually fake designer purses, to tourists in the city center. But Iñárritu adds another layer to Uxbal's position because he's a middleman or go-between because he communicates with the dead, and that's actually like the first image, the first scene of the film. So this kind of complex position comes to a sudden halt when the Chinese immigrants in this sweatshop die from gas inhalation in the cramped basement where they sleep and work. Okay, because why do they die? Because Uxbal bought some heaters, but they are faulty. They were the cheapest he could find, so they kind of malfunction and they all die. Okay, so the thing is that their bodies are dumped into the Mediterranean Sea, but as we see towards the end of the movie, they're washed ashore, and that's a very tragic and kind of, it's eerie and beautiful at the same time. So this is the reminder of those trying to reach that liquid, or cross rather, the liquid lines that separates Europe from Africa. So as Uxbal goes through the last stages of his disease, he's taken care of by, surprise, Ige, who is a Senegalese woman whose husband has been deported to Senegal. Since Uxbal's wife is bipolar and an alcoholic, she cannot take care of their children together. So she is out of the picture, and instead Ige will take on that role as well. So we see how, as the movie moves forward, migrants kind of come to central positions and create alternative affiliations in the film. So So, Biutiful portrays a common juxtaposition in the contemporary landscape, urban landscape, because tourists are going to appear alongside migrants trying to sell their wares. These two sets of characters temporarily occupy the same spaces, but their psychological geographies are far apart. Tourists are the guests of the hospitality industry and comfortably wonder about this iconic and picture perfect Barcelona. Migrants, as nobody's guests, furtively occupy the same spatial premises, but are always going to be wary of the police presence. Their cramped and dismal lodgings belong to a different part of town that is far from beautiful. It belongs to the sweatshops and basements where they work and sleep. Okay, so that's the spatial and ideological fracture. So we have, on the one hand, the monumental and cosmopolitan Barcelona, as depicted, for example, in Woody Allen's Vicky Cristina Barcelona, and this other city, which is so difficult to watch, where we have, poverty, squalor, and inequality, right? And as examples of this, tourists and the migrants trying to sell their wares. So this is a very cramped apartment where basement where migrants both work and sleep in Barcelona. Okay. So while tourists legally and freely move around this monumental city and they're shopping in designer stores, the Senegalese migrants and the Chinese migrants in the movie represent a shifting boundary or a border itself that represents this contingent that is never going to be admitted to the domestic spaces of the city. Theirs is the city that can be described as dismal, as full of labor, race, and class inequalities. So they are within the contours of the European Union, yet they do not belong anywhere. Theirs is just part of they form part of the outside that we find on the inside. Theirs can be qualified as a differential inclusion that, to use Mezzadra and Nielsen, suggests a position that is associated with different degrees of subordination, rule discrimination, segmentation, discrimination, etc., etc. Although surrounded by tourists and international franchises, they can be easily recognized as non-belonging or not belonging. In Bauman's terms, they are part of the disposable, that surplus population that does not fit anywhere. And really, they're really not nobody's guests. So this hostility we encounter in the city can be seen or can be translated into the cinematic language of the film. So what do I mean by that? So there are very few scenes in the movie where we can see the iconic images we all know Barcelona by, such as the Sagrada Familia or the Akbar Tower. Uxbel can see these two landmarks from his hospital room. So since nothing is random in this carefully structured film, and Uxbel's sick body can be a synecdoche of the split city, we can kind of theorize this cropping of the horizon that the movie presents, because the movie is always frustrating our expectations to see and identify all the landmarks we see in Barcelona. It's like, oh, okay, can we see the Sagrada Familia? Can we see this? Can we see that? We can see it, but it's always going to be in a very subdued kind of way. So instead, González Iñárritu relies on interiors, on cramped locales, and insides of apartments, thus moving away from the vision of the city as a commodity. So thus the film separates the places of, or the spaces of the hospitality industry that welcomes tourists and the spaces where the city administers its own hospitality towards its others. When street shots are shown, the sky is frequently cropped out. So Antonio Prete, the Italian philosopher, writes in his treatise on distance that the right to a horizon is the right to look beyond, to look at the limit where the sky and the earth meet. It is the right to direct our vision beyond restrictions, beyond the rectangle of the window, beyond cul-de-sacs. The right to a horizon, he writes, is not part of the Charter of Rights, yet when it is denied, it is the visual and concrete representation of the privation of other rights. Okay, so this is what González Iñárritu kind of presents. You know, he's always cutting and kind of cropping out that line of flight of the horizon in the movie. Why? Because since there is no horizon in the visual imagery of the film, what predominates is instead the city's underbelly. The viewer finds no respite, and neither do the characters. This is the image of the Sagrada Familia on the tower that Uxbal sees from not from a hotel room, but from another place of hospitality. That is the site of a kind of hostile hospitality from the hospital. So that's Uxbal. That's a scene, that's a screenshot. And it's so hard to see the horizon. Okay, you can see it, towards my left, but it's very hard to kind of get to it. Right. So the film shows how this spatial fracture works. That is how and where migrants live and sleep versus the places where the tourists move around. But also is going to show how those iconic spaces become resignified by the presence of migrants. Because the migrants don't stay put in those kind of dismal parts of town, but they also move around. So in such a way that, pure spaces turn into contentious or litigious spaces. And that's the tension that the movie shows us. There is this kind of eruption of violence. The violence that is subdued in this separation or this split in the city becomes obvious. Especially in a scene. So in Biutiful, the African migrants try to sell their wares under the watchful eye of the police, who decides where the vendors can be located and for how long. Okay, so this allocation of spaces seems to converse with Jacques Rancière when he claims that in the end, everything in politics turns on the distribution of spaces. What are these places? How do they function? Why are they there? Who can occupy them? For me, political action always acts upon the social as the litigious distribution of places and roles. It is always a matter of knowing who is qualified to say what a particular place is and what is done in it. So whenever and wherever we see the vendors in the city, we have to realize that their presence is not improvised, but has always been agreed upon with the police. So we have the contrast between the accepted and taken for granted corporate presence in the city and the so-called authorized or, agreed upon presence of the vendors. And such a contrast is made manifest in a scene early in the film. So we see this huge Nike logo that presides the film, kind of this, it's right above all the characters, like a big kind of a big clock or a big sign that presides over the scene. But, in contrast, the street vendors are always going to be subjected to this kind of restricted area where they can be and restricted schedule, okay? Because the police is always going to decide where and when, okay? So the sign is just on top, and at the bottom, we have the street vendors and the tourists, okay? So if the Plaza de Catalunya, those and Las Ramblas, these are iconic places in Barcelona, shape the core of a touristic city, González Iñárritu situates migrants alongside tourists, okay? Thus disrupting the widely accepted distribution of spaces in the city and what is to be done in them. In so doing, Biutiful transforms the well-known and iconic places of the city into litigious spaces. And that's the kind of violence that is going to erupt in the movie. I'm going to try to show the scene later on, okay? But there is this very interesting scene set in Plaza de Catalunya. It starts with this a kind of aerial view of the plaza, to later descend to the street level where African vendors are shown selling their goods. The scene dramatizes Michel de Certeau's double articulation of the city as the panorama and the migrational city, the city of Icarus versus the city of Daedalus, okay? What happens above and what happens at the street level. So as Oxbow has previously warned the Senegalese that kind of overlooks the vendors, the square is off limits. They shouldn't be there. They cannot be there. So apart from selling fake designer goods, they're also this time selling drugs. And the police, kind of gets upset about this kind of transgression. And they're not ready to ignore this spatial transgression. So the police raids La Plaza de Catalunya and runs off the vendors, creating chaos along Las Ramblas, which is, all these Senegalese migrants just running down Las Ramblas and creating chaos and disruption. But that's kind of the essence of the city, the kind of the violence that is right below that kind of beautiful city that we're all used to. So the Senegalese migrant escapes to the Gothic Quarter, where he's brutally, emphasis on brutally, beaten and taken away by the police. So La Plaza de Catalunya and Las Ramblas are transformed into sites of conflict, not the sites of, where, you can just wander around and have a good time. But, they're transformed into this eruption of violence that is going to dismantle the vision of Barcelona as a commodity that is admired all over the world. So this is what the film does. It resignifies, provides new meanings to the locations that we all know and that have been traditionally associated with a cosmopolitan Barcelona, and reveals how certain actors are subject to the implementation of one particular vision of urban space. The image of Barcelona as an enclave, as a homogeneous and pure space. However, the abundance of scenes depicting the circulation of money, because the migrants are always, kind of handling money, giving money to Oxbow, giving money to the police. So this circulation of money shows how these actors definitely contribute to the keeping of the social and police order that actually harasses them. Okay, so this is a very interesting circle because they maintain that system of repression within the city. So as one corrupt cop admits to Oxbow, he could not survive on a cop's salary. So he needs the migrants to sustain his well-being. So who is the host and who is the parasite? In this subtle equilibrium, the police profits of the migrants who have a physical and economic presence in the city, and the interconnections are more intricate in Oxbow's case. For one of the workers at the sweatshop watches his children, and he eventually asks Ige to take care of his children after his death to cancer. So the arrangement situates Ige as the head of the household, as the motherly presence that will take care of him until he dies, and will take care of the children until the mother returns, if she ever does. So the globalization that brought about corporate power to the city has also brought about a layer of transnational actors, as Saskia Sacken claims. So in globalization and its discontent, Sassen claims that the proliferation of chain stores and franchises should not make us lose sight of the fact that there is an intimate relationship between corporate power and the rising numbers of immigrant workers that all these franchises are going to bring into the cities. So Biutiful shows how immigrants may not have direct power in the city, but they do have presence and emerge as significant subjects as they create alternative affiliations. So the sounds of the sea open and close the film in a dreamlike state, visually absent from the film. The Mediterranean Sea does appear as the story draws to an end. And when it does not comfort the viewer with a vision of, this beautiful beach at dawn, or if it does, it's just only for a second, because the camera immediately focuses on the dead bodies. The Chinese migrants that were disposed of by dumping them into the sea are now returning naturally and rhythmically as their bodies are washed ashore. So once again, González Iñárritu frustrates our viewers' expectations to identify specific landmarks, in this case, the beach. Instead, as the movie does with Plaza de Catalunya and the Ramblas, the beach becomes another contested site at the center of lines and demarcations. So just like the city separates and differentiates between tourists as the recipients of the hospitality industry and migrants as unwanted guests, it also dramatizes the contradiction between, and I quote from Rancière, affirming free circulation in a world where borders and the practices of keeping borders under surveillance and defining groups of people who cannot cross the sea. So the scene dismantles the varnish of a city's cosmopolitanism and brings to the fore the tragedy of those who set out to sea in search for the European dream. But it does more. The film shows the impossibility of maintaining and keeping pure spaces as opposed to infected spaces apart. It also shows the unstoppable border crossing that takes place both on the contours of the city, but also within the inner lines of the city. Thank you.